Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 69, nice, of Super Switch Headz, the premier Nintendo podcast on all of the internet. My name is David Howe.
My name is Patrick Nisley.
My name is Matthew Stoner.
My name is Kim Williams.
Yes.
There we go. Ladies and gentlemen, Kim Williams has joined us on the podcast. How are you, Kim?
I'm good. How are y'all today?
I'm okay.
Doing okay? Doing okay.
I'm pretty good here.
Yeah, certainly been better, but doing all right.
Yeah.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen. This is episode 69, and we are recording this on 6/9, June the 9th, which means only one thing. This week, we're going to be talking all about sex in video games, the way that sex has been represented in video games, times that there have been controversies with nudity or sex in video games. And we're going to be kind of delving into some of that history. Nintendo now has seemingly raised the ban hammer off of what they do and don't allow on their platforms, which has led to some very interesting games on the eShop. We'll be delving into all the things that has made that possible in the past. Very excited about that. I think we've got quite a good list of games to talk about here. Before we get into the topic, do you have anything you wanted to shout out or any giveaways or anything, Patrick?
Yeah, I did want to mention, well, I guess I will say this. We ended the giveaway for the Steam code, and Mr. Coconutty won that. We didn't have a ton of entrants, so congrats to Mr. Coconutty there. And we have had a second giveaway pop up thanks to our guest last week, DCD, Daniel Murphy. Thank you so much. Dan is giving away a copy of Xenoblade Chronicles in our name. And actually, the giveaway ends on June 12th, so you got a couple days here. If you go to our Twitter page, you have a decent shot at this because we are not huge. So there's
Dang, Patrick.
There's only 30 or so.
At least
entrants.
put on like airs or something.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, as a giveaway enthusiast, you want to find these kind of giveaways where there are smaller outlets that are trying to get their name out there. But point being, if you're listening to this, you have a decent shot at winning this. And thank you to Daniel Murphy for giving this away. And
if you want to know how good of a game Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition is, we recorded last week's podcast episode all about Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. So make sure you check out episode 68 with DCD, who's giving away the episode.
And if you want to help us become so big that you can't win our giveaways, tell a friend about our podcast, leave us a review, share the podcast somewhere online. That would help us out a lot too.
Yeah, and something I would really implore is give us a subscribe on YouTube. We now officially have more videos on our YouTube page than we have subscribers, which is a depressing number.
We are talking ourselves up today.
Listen, you're listening to us. You understand the quality level of what's going on here. Give us a share. Give us a subscribe. We would really appreciate it.
Listen, do it, if not for any of us, but for David, who spends hours editing this podcast.
I truly do.
He refines it like someone creating diamonds. Do it for
This is good stuff. I just snorted.
Don't worry, I'll edit that out. That's part of the whole process.
I don't think you will. Are y'all ready to talk about? I mean, is there anything we need to address? Like the world is on fire still. Do we want to talk about that?
It's looking a little better, right? I mean, I think we're already seeing some. It's not perfect, obviously, but we're already starting to see some substantive change.
That's true.
Defunding
from about a week of protesting. Yeah. And so that's got me a little hesitantly hopeful. You know what I mean? I think obviously nothing is slowing down, and I don't think that it should. And I think that the more that people fight for this stuff, I think the more change we are going to see. So yeah, we're with you, and keep it up. That's what I have to say.
Yeah. Hey, real quickly too, this would have been E3. We would, if there wasn't a world on fire, E3 might have been happening right now, and we would have had like a Nintendo Direct today.
Oh, we would have.
But yeah,
you're right.
That's crazy.
We would have had a Nintendo Direct on 6/9. Nice.
That would have been so nice.
It would have been all horny games.
Yeah.
We are going to be doing an E3 sort of retrospective, and we got a very special guest lined up for that as well. So if you're feeling like you're missing E3 quite a bit, stay tuned. In a couple weeks, we'll have a very special episode for you.
Cool. Well, I think we'll get into gaming news, and the first one kind of is related to what we were just talking about on some level. There is a big bundle of games that's available on itch.io, one of the alternative gaming websites we don't talk about a lot, but there's a lot of games you can get there, and developers have ease on putting games up there. So there's a bundle for racial equality, which I believe all of the proceeds, if not most of them, go to support the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund and Community Bail Fund. So that's a good thing. Go check that out. Yeah.
It's a crazy bundle. It's like over 700 games or something like that.
When I clicked on it today, it was like 1,400 and some change. It was a lot of games available.
You have to spend at least $5, but if you are going to go out there and do that, you should probably spend more to support this cause.
Yeah, and 100% of the proceeds go to charity and benefits. So it's like, it's definitely, we've seen a lot of bundles like this in the past, the Humble Bundle. But this is all going to a great cause. And if you haven't donated yet, there's absolutely no reason not to at this point. Yeah. And there's a lot of really great games in that bundle as well. It's definitely worth getting.
I mean, if you're donating to this cause, you should donate to this cause for many reasons. But right, just like naming some of the games.
List them all,
bundle.
Matt. List them all.
I'm ready. Okay. Overland, Night in the Woods, Short Hike, Celeste.
Ooh, a Short Hike is a fantastic game, y'all. I paid more, if it was really on this list.
Patrick, do not interrupt me. Extreme Meat Punks Forever, Beacon, Walden, a game, Moncala.
Seriously, Short Hike is worth a lot of money. I mean, it's actually a pretty short game, but like it's a great game. Anyway, so moving on, a few follow-up news items this week. We talked about this a while back. Nintendo had a big data breach where a bunch of accounts information got out. Some people had their accounts hacked and like V-Bucks spot on them and that kind of stuff. Nintendo had previously said that 160,000 user accounts were accessed, but now they're saying it's actually more like 300,000, almost double that amount. So this, obviously, if you haven't already set up two-factor authentication on everything, you probably should, right? I think that's just a smart thing to do in this day and age when you can. And then I don't know that this was related or not, but we got a new Switch system update. We're now running 10.0.4. And I actually ran into this problem myself. I was trying to buy a game on the Switch, I don't know, sometime in the last 2 weeks, and I could not because my old credit card information was no longer valid, and I could not update my credit card information. So they fixed that. I think that's all we got, which is not themes, it's not folders, it's not any of the things we want.
But the ability to purchase a game is a pretty important update, I think. As I understand it, they had put in some stopgaps in order to stop some of the credit card issues that had been going along with the data breach. But they kind of went a step too far, and then this fix has fixed that. So everything should be back to normal again. I never ran into this problem because I always used my PayPal whenever buying games on the eShop. But if you've been trying to buy games and you haven't been able to, you can now. So that's good.
In the next piece of news, Kirk Scott has left Nintendo of America. You may remember Kirk Scott from a lot of the Nindies videos in the last several years. He was the third-party developer and publisher relations manager. Been there about 5 years, which is kind of a shame because I think Kirk Scott did a lot to, presumably, make indies such a big part of Nintendo's marketing push and all that. At least that's been sort of my understanding. And I don't know much about him personally, but that just seems like a bummer. Hopefully he's on to bigger, better things.
Yeah, this isn't the first time that Nintendo has lost someone on their indies team, actually. I'm forgetting his name right now, but one of the guys that now works on the indies outreach program for Sony used to work at Nintendo as well. Honestly, I think Nintendo is in a really good position with indies right now. I think that they've clearly courted the smaller developers for this platform, and everybody's seen like massive success. I mean, not everybody, but a lot of developers have seen massive success on the eShop for the Switch. So I think they're going to be in good hands, and as long as they keep up the good work, I think we should be fine.
Coming up on June 26th, Nintendo is having its annual shareholder meeting. It is their 80th annual shareholder meeting. That's a big number for...
That's crazy.
Yeah, that is crazy. And of course, because of the coronavirus pandemic situation, they've got some, like, they're going to make it shorter. People have to wear masks. And I think there's like some other steps they're taking, but they are having an in-person meeting in Kyoto, which is also crazy. And we got a little bit of Smash related news here. Masahiro Sakurai has been talking about how in his most recent Famitsu column, he plays a ton of video games, but doesn't share information about that because of the speculation that people assume that whatever he's playing means the character is coming to Smash. And because of that, he can't really talk about games publicly. So that sucks because I imagine he would have some interesting things to say.
Yeah, that's a bummer that he can't talk about it.
Yeah, I get why. Because people, especially here in the West, tend to hound his poor self on Twitter. Just like anytime there's any news, they're like, "Oh, bring X to Smash." And I totally get it, and I'm sure that's really frustrating. I think a lot of Japanese developers are very frustrated with American Twitter users in general, like Hideki Kamiya as well.
Right.
But yeah, I think, he said that he doesn't go on like TV shows that could have like anything to do with certain games because he's worried what people are going to think. Yeah, I mean, do you guys think he's overreacting, or do you feel bad for him?
I feel bad for him, and I don't think he's overreacting. Like, there is a way about fans, especially in the West, where they just like take the tiniest thing and just go all the way off the deep end. Like, I've been getting myself sucked into these Legend of Zelda theory videos on YouTube a lot. And like, that's just like one example of people just going all the way left with any shred of information they get.
Yeah, considering we thought Waluigi was in Smash because they had a purple and yellow chair in the background of one of the Smash Directs.
Fair.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like...
It hasn't been deconfirmed yet, Matt.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, Alejandro Garcia.
You guys are not wrong, and I think that definitely people look way too much into it, and I do think that people have been harassing the poor man on Twitter, and I think that should stop. But on the flip side, I think the only reason that happens is because there's been a history of like obscure like references to characters before they're revealed. Like he does like to do that.
Hints,
yeah, they do drop hints, and so like we're all kind of primed to look for that kind of stuff. And also, this is kind of just like what comes with being famous, right? Like, I don't think that there's anyone out there that's famous that hasn't been harassed on Twitter. And it sucks. I wish that weren't the case, but I wish he'd just be a little bit more liberal with his block button and be more open about the games he's playing. Because I'm like you. I'd love to hear about the games he's playing because he's an avid gamer,
And in more Smash news, there's a North American online open event that was scheduled to start. And Nintendo of America decided, in their words, in acknowledgement and out of respect to current events, and we presume they mean the Black Lives Matter protests, they decided to postpone the opening of that. I am actually doing this tournament, y'all. I'm sure I'm going to get my butt kicked in the first round, but I'm very unclear if that affects my timing and stuff because I haven't been able to figure it out. Because I am doing it this weekend. So
wish you all the luck.
And hey,
good
we
luck.
haven't talked about this in a while. It's June. When do y'all think we're getting the ARMS DLC rep acknowledged? It would have been E3.
It's got to be this month.
Well, they said June, so. But when?
I know exactly when, and it's going to be minutes after this episode comes out.
Because of a hint in Sakurai's tweets, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he said, it's so super to play Switch with your head. No. But no, I mean, it's definitely going to be this month. We talked about this last week, that just because Nintendo has canceled their June Direct doesn't mean we're not going to be getting stuff coming out this month.
Sure.
I still think that we're going to be getting a lot of announcements. I think A, they're looking for the right time because everything's been moved around because of coronavirus, and B, like you said, with the Black Lives Matter protests that are going on right now, they're moving some stuff out to give that some space in the news cycle, right? And so I think we'll be seeing a lot of stuff. We've got EA events coming up. Everything's just been kind of pushed. So I'm going to guess next week.
I hope so.
Just quickly, I think it's going to be all the ARMS character. It's going to be like Bowser Jr. It's going to be all of them.
That's real. I mean, they all have long, extendy arms. It's perfect. Except for Twintel.
And Mechanica.
And Mechanica. Yeah. But her robot has long arms.
Yeah. And kind of relatedly, the Sony PlayStation 5 event that was supposed to happen was postponed due to the protests. They have announced a new date. It is June 11th. So we will hear presumably all about PlayStation 5 and what that's going to be like later this week, right after this podcast comes out.
I am so pumped.
I'm excited.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any hopes or specifics that you're hoping to see on June 11th?
As long as it's at least, just give me some backwards compatibility, just a little bit, man. Like, I don't need a lot, but it honestly, PlayStation was my first ever console, and the inconsistency with being backwards compatible has really been my only gripe with them on any level, but it's always such a good console every time, so I can't stay mad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Xbox certainly has them beat with the backwards compatibility, right? Like, I think that's what I really wish PlayStation was putting their efforts towards, but I think time has kind of proven that they don't need to. Like, they still sell buku consoles without backwards compatibility, but it's like, Xbox has really beaten them to the punch with a lot of these reveals, so maybe they're feeling the pressure a little bit. But at the very least, yeah, we got to see I'd love to see almost 100% PS4 backwards compatibility at the very least.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Any games you guys are looking forward to from this? Anything that you think might be there?
I think we're going to see some new games pulling from old console launches. So maybe we'll see a new Zone of the Enders, or maybe like a new Jumping Flash, which was part of the PS1 release, to kind of bring back some of those old school PlayStation players who maybe have moved over to Xbox because of Game Pass.
Those are inspired choices, man.
Yeah.
Thanks. I'm putting all my chips in for Jumping Flash.
I think I'm really hoping that we hear something about these rumors that we've been hearing about, like some of the Konami properties that have been sold. So something about a new Silent Hill, potentially some Castlevania stuff like we were talking about before. I think that would be really great. Kim, did you have something you're looking forward to?
So one thing as far as like a Castlevania new entry, like especially considering that we've had the Castlevania anime on Netflix, like now would be the time. Like, go ahead and get that in while people are still riding on that anime high. But then I think I'd also like to see more Final Fantasy remakes. I'm halfway through the 7 remake, and if they could just, number one, finish that up, but then give me a remake of 8. Can I get a remake of 9? What about 10? Can I get a fresh remake of 12, not just like a half soft glossed over remake of 12?
So question for you, Kim, would you prefer another remake, or news about the rest of Final Fantasy VII remake, or would you prefer the announcement of a Final Fantasy 16?
So I think I would actually prefer an announcement of Final Fantasy 16. I value 7 but it was not my favorite. I just appreciate what it did for the genre and for the series.
Yeah, I'm with you on a 9 remake. I think that would be pretty awesome.
Oh yeah, that would be so nice.
And then moving on, Monolith Soft, Tetsuya Takahashi, who we talked about last week in our Xenoblade episode, did an interview with the Spanish language website Vandal, all about Monolith Soft's sort of what they're working on and all kinds of stuff. The thing that's getting shared around a lot is that he said that they really want to continue increasing the value of the brand they have created with Xenoblade Chronicles, which presumably means they are making more or have plans to make more Xenoblade games. How are you doing, Matt?
I can't wait.
I can smell your sweat through the Discord chat right now.
And
he doesn't know what to say to that, does he?
Nah, I'm sweating all over. It's excitement.
I mean, we talked about this last week, right? That they had talked how they have games currently in development, and we were kind of hoping that some of those would be in the Xenoblade series, and it doesn't seem like it's going away anytime soon. It's been a success for them.
Yeah. And we know they're working on some other new game. They've told us, could that be a Xenoblade game? We don't know. But maybe something's closer than we think, if so. And there was this is always non-news, but maybe it means something. In Japan, Nintendo renewed a bunch of trademarks, filed a bunch of trademarks for some things. And the one that's getting pointed out as a big one is Game Boy Advance. So people are wondering if that means something. But they also renewed Excite Truck and Mii and Wavebird and Paper Mario and some other things. So, and Wii U. So I don't know that there's too much to get excited about. This is probably just standard business practice of applying for trademarks. But anytime this happens, people like to pick it apart. What do you think, David?
You heard it here first, folks. Wii U Virtual Console is coming to the Switch. Not only can you buy Super Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, but you can also get the original.
Sans DLC.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I've always wanted, is just have less item boxes.
It's like the first cut of Star Wars. You can't get it anymore.
Like you said, this is probably not anything. They renew trademarks all the time when they're about to expire. So that could just be what it is in order to kind of save the brand. But I mean, I would love Game Boy Advance games on the Nintendo Switch Online. I think that's the system I would want most, honestly, even beyond N64.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think we'll be getting another console added to that either way in September?
Yeah, September. Ooh, it's soon. It's pretty soon.
Could be like you're saying N64 probably.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm skeptical that they're going to add another system. Period.
Yeah, I don't like.
Really?
For what? I guess. I mean, obviously
They should,
more money,
but I don't think they're gonna.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
more money, but also like I feel like the Switch is really crushing it, especially in the pandemic times. Like it's not staying on the shelves. Like, do they need another one? Not really. I don't think.
Yeah, but just out of the goodness of their being,
Fair.
do it. I think they have said in the past that they're looking to increase the value of the Nintendo Switch Online membership. So, this is one way to do it. Yeah, that'd be great. But yeah, I don't think this means that Excite Truck is coming to the Switch.
Please no.
And we talked about this would have been E3. Well, there is the standard, what would have been E3 Summer Games sale happening on the Nintendo eShop, which is just started and is running through June 16th. So you should check that out if you're interested in picking up some new games. There's some decent deals on here. Anybody want to shout out in particular? If you've looked at it, Unravel 2 is $5. That's a great game for $5. I'd definitely recommend that. There's a few first party Nintendo games that are on sale.
Yeah, I think you can get Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze for about $40. A lot of the AAAs that you don't usually see on sale are on sale, which is really cool. And then just like a shit ton of indies too. So it's worth checking out and coursing through, because we've talked about a lot of the games in here before, but it's kind of just too many to go over right now.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I'm for sure going to get SNK Heroines.
Yeah.
And then I saw Layton's Mystery Journey on there, which I've always been a fan of the Professor Layton games. So like that's probably going to come home too.
Nice.
This will finally encourage me to play A Hat in Time. I've always been meaning to play that game because I heard it's such a good platformer.
Nice.
Yeah. I haven't gotten around to that one either, but I'd like to at some point soon.
And then our last bit of news is something I feel like we're including just because of the topic today. There was a game. This is a nice segue here. There's a game that released on the eShop called Do Not Feed the Monkeys. I don't know anything about it other than this. It was rated E for everyone, which is the ESRB rating, which presumably you know about. You know, games have ratings. This is the lowest it can be. It's the G rating for video games. But apparently this game has nudity in it. And so it has been pulled and will be likely re-rated and all that. And, you know, I don't know a lot about how the ESRB ratings work, but some people were saying, this is total speculation of people saying online, that it's really not that great of a regulation. Like people, especially for smaller indie games, they will just submit information and it's taken at face value often.
Yeah, it's not a great system at all. Like as I understand it, the ESRB doesn't actually play any of these games. You essentially create video packages for the ESRB that the board members will then watch, right? So like, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but like this is where like the hot coffee problem came into play with Grand Theft Auto, is that was something that was like hidden in the game's code. And like this issue with Do Not Feed the Monkeys was like, I think it was like there's like a TV you can put on or something, and one of the channels could have nudity on it, but it's only if you put in like a very specific command. So it's like, because it's not like actively part of the gameplay, I guess it was overlooked in the ratings board meeting or however they do it. But yeah, that's a big no-no. You have to kind of disclose all that stuff or else you get in a lot of trouble.
And I think that gives us a nice segue into talking about all of the history of and our thoughts on sex and video games, which we will talk about after we take a real quick break. All right, and we are here in episode 69 on 6-9 to talk about sex and video games. I think the plan is to kind of talk about it in some broad strokes, but talk about sort of the history / some notable controversies, and then maybe some of our big picture issues of that I think extend beyond video games, but and then some of our personal experiences and that kind of stuff. One thing is that this is true of movies and a lot of things in popular culture. Sex is presented from a very male, straight oriented view in video games, and also is very juvenile in a lot of video games.
Certainly can be.
Yes, and that is a very common theme I think we'll see in a lot of this. Personally,
Definitely very juvenile because we're recording episode 69.
Right, we are part of the
We never said we're not part of the problem. Yeah.
Hopefully we'll be part of the solution too.
I think that sure. But I think that video games are like a relatively recent medium as far as a lot of mediums are concerned. Like any big new form of media, sex is often at the forefront. As technology advances, there's usually some way to make porn out of it. And that has been the truth for a time immemorial. But I think that because games initially started as toys and were seen as, just things for children, that anytime there's been any sort of sexuality in games, it's been met with a ton of criticism and a ton of controversy. And a lot of that has come from, governmental bodies, or like we've been talking about the ratings boards and stuff like that. That's part of the reason that the ESRB was created in the first place, was for stuff like this. And so, I think we're just now starting to get out of that pubescent period where the medium is taken a lot more seriously, and we're seeing sexuality, approached in a more conscientious and normal way than just like, ooh, boobies, this is supposed to be for kids, So I think we're entering that growth time right now. And, but it's important to look back and see kind of like how we got to this point.
Yeah. And I think to that point, the reason that we're seeing more games is because prior we had only a few places where people could buy adult only games. It was all like hidden behind a curtain at a sex shop where you could buy adult only games. But now, because we have Steam, because we have, itch.io or any other platform, like a digital platform, which gives access to content creators to make, games based on sex or sex-based games.
All of Japan is another place you can get them to.
That's true. I don't know. Yeah. I think as well, we're seeing things like sex dolls in coming more into the mainstream, right? So like, why would sex games be a far leap from that, or sex depicted in video games be a far leap from that? So I mean, if we as a culture, as a global culture, are getting more comfortable with the real dolls, I think is what they're called. If we're getting more comfortable with the idea of those, why not video games? Why not sex depicted in video games?
The difference between all of this with video games, as we talked about in like prior episodes, is the player gets to make choices about the character, and the player gets to assume the role of this character. And that could be both good and bad choices, like morally good or bad, based on who that character is. And so, we'll talk about some of the controversies, like the hot coffee mod, where a player is playing a mini game, but they're playing a sex-based mini game. And a lot of that is new, as Kim, as you were saying, in our culture, to have an interactive game that's about a character, having sex on screen, where you're controlling that character.
Sex is being destigmatized all over the place, not just in games, right? And so, yeah, it's definitely a trend that we'll be seeing a lot more throughout all types of industries.
And maybe we can just jump into some of the early games then. We won't belabor some of these too much, but apparently one of the first widely acknowledged games that was sex-based, if you will, was Soft Porn Adventure, which was just a text-based game released by Online Systems, which ended up merging with Sierra, or becoming renamed as Sierra Online. And they were the maker of Leisure Suit Larry, which is another big game in this sort of history of adult-oriented games. And that was sort of the inspiration for that, apparently. And then I've never heard of much or played this game, but apparently one of the first games that depicted nudity and sex and that sort of thing was a Japanese game called Nightlife, which Nightlife sounds interesting. I'm not endorsing it or anything. I don't know much about it, but it sounds like it was actually maybe a little more grown up, if that's the right word. Like it was marketed at least as an aid in sex life of couples. And so it had like sexual positions and like stuff like that. That sounds like maybe a step in the right direction for this sort of thing. That's not just boobs or something, Yeah.
I wonder if that holds up. I got to check that game out.
Yeah. And then one of the big ones that we have to talk about is Custer's Revenge, which was an Atari game that has a lot of problems. And in particular, it seems like the game involved raping a Native American woman or performing sex acts, at least.
So this game was developed by Mystique, and at the time there were a couple forays into like adult games for the Atari 2600. Custer's Revenge was one of them. There was another one with the unfortunate title of Beat 'em and Eat 'em, which was a game basically where you were on top of a building with like a cartoonishly enormous dong and would have to like ejaculate down to people at the bottom of the building. That's a little bit more like lighthearted than Custer's Revenge. Custer's Revenge was, basically, you all know the history of General Custer's Last Stand, who was, he was defeated by Native Americans in the 1800s. And this basically was like him coming back and, attacking the Native Americans that beat him in the first place. And if you look at, Yes.
Can
No,
we
I
just
mean,
say that?
it's fucked up for many reasons, that especially. But this was like really the first like really widespread known form of sex in games. And if you go back and look at the scenes, it's an Atari 2600 game. So it's like, you really can't tell what's going on. But it is in the annals of history at this point now as one of the first games depicting sex.
I think you can tell that guy has an erect penis in those pictures.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't take that many pixels to render a penis back in those days.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was one of the first ones that I had ever heard about as well.
And then, David, you have this one on the list. I don't know much about this. Bubble Bath Babes. Can you tell us a little bit about this game?
Yeah. So I have this one on just for me personally. Bubble Bath Babes was an NES game that was released that was essentially just a puzzle game, like kind of the Match 3 like bubble style puzzle games. But if you beat it in a certain amount of time, you're rewarded with a very pixelated image of a naked lady. And the only reason I have it on here is because when I was young and I found out what ROMs were, that was one of the first ROMs I downloaded, baby.
And I think we should, to be fair to Atari and Nintendo, I think both of those games were unlicensed games.
That's correct.
So
yeah.
like these weren't officially released for whatever that's worth. And I'm sure we're going to jump over stuff. So if you're out there listening and there was some big moment in sex and video games that we skip over, let us know. But I think we have to talk a little bit about Night Trap, even though I don't think that game really had much sex or any sex in it, right? But because it was more described as being violent, but also sexual violence, even though I don't think that's in it either. David, you can correct me if I'm wrong about any of this, but this is the game that caused a big fuss in along with Mortal Kombat in terms of there needs to be ratings on video games, and sort of what you were talking about, David, with games were marketed to kids, but these games felt not kid friendly. And so it's the reason we have the ESRB. It's which is like a self-regulating entity that the video game industry created to avoid government regulation of its games.
Yeah, I mean, Custer's Revenge is like a game that should not be sold to children, right? Bubble Bath Babes is like specifically pornography. Like Night Trap is a great example of like very conservative pro clutching, right? Like if you, I replayed this game recently, and it's not great as a game, but it was one of the first games to use like full motion video. So I think they're just being
real.
It's like real women in this game, like already set off a lot of people that had very conservative values, especially in government. And then, yeah, like you said, it was marketed, or at least it was said to be a game with a lot of sexual violence, which is not true at all. I think the one scene that anybody was ever talking about, one of the friends of the main character that's at the house, like goes into the bathroom to like fix up her makeup or something, and she's in a negligee. You know, some people, like the murderers that are like in the house, are like stalking her in the bathroom. But that scene was like shown out of context all the time when they were trying to prove that like video games were very harmful for children. And then, that's what led to, at first was I think Sega had started a ratings board that was specific to them. And that eventually led to the Entertainment Software Ratings Board.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like Nintendo was part of this too, because there was a United States Senate hearing where Nintendo's senior vice president Howard Lincoln, testified in front of the committee, basically saying, Night Trap would never appear on a Nintendo system.
Right. Yeah.
There were like different op-eds. They're like, well, yeah, that's because Night Trap had full motion video and it played on a CD-ROM. It couldn't technically play on a Nintendo console, anyways.
Right. Right.
But it didn't match like Nintendo's moral standards at that time for who their player base was.
Which in and of itself was opportunistic from Nintendo, right? Like this is, and Patrick, you and I know we both recently read Console Wars.
Yeah.
And they go over this in great detail in that book. It's a great read if you're interested in this topic.
Totally.
But it was like Nintendo basically fed right into all that kind of like pearl clutching and the panic that was going on around the country as an opportunity to kind of like stick it to Sega, right? And then there was also, I think one of the things that made Nintendo realize that they maybe weren't doing the right thing from a business perspective was when they put out like a censored version of Mortal Kombat, and sales were like way less than it was on the Genesis, right? Where that was uncensored violence. So it ended up biting them in the ass, and they've clearly reversed their decision now. But yeah, Nintendo used to be quite a pious company.
One of the next big things on our list here to talk about is that hot coffee mod, or part of the code from Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. And so if you're listening and you're not aware of this, there was in the game, which this was a PlayStation 2 era game, and Rockstar put into this game a sex minigame, like Matt said, where I've never seen it, to be honest, to be fair. But my understanding is that, it's like a gameplay element, but it's not in the actual game. It was in the code of the game, and they kind of, separated it out in the code, and there's no way to access it on your PlayStation 2. But if you were able to hack into the code, as obviously people did, you could get this mod and actually play this part of the game. It sounds like, all you had to do was make a single bit change as well. Like from the mod, that's all the modders had to do. So it's not like it was a giant, reconstruction of this thing that was in the game, which I think this brings up some interesting dilemmas, and we'll kind of get into this with another one too, and that this is part of the game, but not part of the game. And this caused a great furor as well. Anybody here ever seen this or have any thoughts on this big event?
This came around right when my friend got Roadrunner high-speed cable internet. And one of the first things we did was download an ISO of Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 and make sure we figure out how to play this hot coffee mod. It is a fully built minigame. It was, you can tell from the developers, they fully intended to incorporate this into the game. And for various reasons, you could probably assume they decided not to put it into the game because it would be labeled an adult-only game, and some retailers don't carry adult-only games.
Most.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen a physical copy with that AO rating on it.
It's a fully featured minigame. Just looking at a screenshot, there's like instructions in the corner, and it's like push up and down in rhythm.
Oh, wow. Change
view, change position, quit.
Just like real life. But yeah, this was another one that got the public talking about it, right? And this is one where I know, like, one of the big people that came out against this was Hillary Clinton, actually, whenever this was known to be a thing. And like, yeah, like you said, Patrick, is it fair to Rockstar for them to have had to, which they did, recall like tons and tons of copies of this game because something was buried in the code that could only be pulled out through modifying, right? And that gets into a bigger conversation, I think, about, where digital rights land as far as like, what people are responsible for if something is in the game's code that isn't readily available. We've talked about that a lot with like modding in general.
Sort of talking about the rating, I think this game, like you said, the reason is caused some controversy too is kind of similar to that, the game we talked about before we took a break, that it was rated presumably lower than it should be if it does indeed contain this content. But it also gets into the question of like, I think we're finally here at like gameplay of presumably consensual sex, right? Like, like what do we need this in a mainstream game? You know what I mean? Like a sex scene in a movie that's too much. You know what I mean? Like, do we need gameplay of sex? Like, I understand why there might be some in a cutscene, and we'll talk about that too. Do y'all have any thoughts on that? Do you think it's fine for there to be sex gameplay? Do you think it's weird or that should be reserved for porn games and people can have their fun and I don't need that in a regular game?
Kim, do you have any thoughts on that?
I actually do. I have a few thoughts on it. So like for me, a lot of the exposure to like sex in games has come from a lot of like the dating sims and like Japanese dating sims and stuff like that. Less of the San Andreas type, less of the Leisure Suit Larry types. But in those games, right, like sex is heavily hinted at, and it's just like you get like the glossy filter over the scene and like the cloudiness and like the sparkly bits, and like it feels like an achievement. Like when you get that that still in the game, you're like, yeah, I achieved something. I unlocked that scene, right? So like I think that there is an achievement place for sex in games, but anything beyond that, I don't know, right? Like, I mean, to each their own. Everybody likes something different.
Yeah, I think it's the same as with movies, right, or literature or whatever. It's like a sex scene can be tastefully done, or it can be there purely for titillation, and that's it, right? And I think that I don't think that this minigame that was in San Andreas was anything more than a juvenile minigame, for them doing it for the purpose of pushing the boundaries, which is what the Grand Theft Auto series has always been about. The game was always very controversial. I think they always just wanted to push it as far as they possibly could, which is why they wanted to do this in the first place.
That makes sense.
Which I think that's fine.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't think that you shouldn't have it in there just because it doesn't really serve a purpose other than to be what it is. But yeah, it should be marketed as such for sure. And they probably should have had the foresight to remove this from the code before they shipped the game.
Yeah.
Because it ended up costing them millions and millions of dollars to recall all these games. But yeah.
Well, maybe we can move on. A couple of things that I think connect our next 2 points. I have never played Mass Effect, so I'm going to lean on all of y'all that have. But I know Mass Effect has some sex scenes in it, and is kind of a more story-based game. And I don't know how tastefully they're done. I've watched a little bit of clips in preparation for this, but and I know this caused a little bit of another hand-wringing over sex in video games. There's a nice Fox News clip, David, that you added to our notes. Or maybe that was you, Matt. I don't know who added.
No, that I added.
I'm sorry. I always credit
Jeff,
David with your ads.
It's all good. Yeah, Jeff Keighley's in that video.
Yeah, I saw that.
Talking about
he's the only reasonable person in
sex
that video. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, it's weird, and it's weird because like sex is depicted from a character you play. I don't think there's like player agency over the sex scenes. It just the character you play just happens, to have sex.
And maybe there's some agency in who you have sex with, right? Like who you romance in those games. So there's that sense.
Yeah,
of
I mean,
it.
this game was like decently groundbreaking in this regard because the sex was romantic in nature and not just like conquest driven, like you find in a lot of these games that we've been talking about up to this point. It was about who you were in a relationship with. So it really felt earned and appropriate within this universe that they had created, which was just like a really great step forward, I think, for games in general. And we see that a lot with like The Witcher and the Witcher series. Witcher 3 has like several sex scenes that feel a little bit more earned because the character kind of calls for it, you know what I mean? But I think another huge thing about this game was you could either be a male or female version of Commander Shepard. You could take male or female partner. So you could have same-sex coupling in this game, and also like interspecies coupling in this game, because there's a lot of aliens in the game. And you can, it didn't have to just be like straight sex between two humans. It was like a very diverse group that you could potentially have relationships with, which I think was another pretty big groundbreaking moment in video games.
And then the last thing on our list before we get it back into the bigger picture thing is a game which I have also never played called Beyond Two Souls, which was a PlayStation 3 era game in which Ellen Page was an actress. Is that the term we use when people do mocap and they use their likeness in a video game?
Yes, of course, they're actors.
Okay. So
Andy Serkis would like a word with you, Patrick.
So she was in this game, and I've never played this game, so maybe it's integral to the story, a needless shower scene with her in it. that feels needless from me watching a clip of it in research for this episode. And they rendered her fully naked, even though they don't show her fully naked in the game. And there was a big spat about that because obviously this was another sort of in the code of the game, but not in the game situation where people could go in and then pull out a naked representation of an actress, where she did not agree to that, presumably. And I think there was a big lawsuit about this.
Yeah, she ended up suing. I think she ended up suing Sony. I'm not sure exactly who it was, but it was something that was not in her contract to like have her full, because she didn't get like her body scanned. Like it was created. They created a naked body like based on what they thought her body would look like. This was the developer for this game was Quantic Dream. It's the same people who made Heavy Rain and most recently, I guess, Detroit Become Human. So David Cage from Quantic Dream is kind of like obsessed with having needless shower scenes in video games. It's almost a little pervy up to a point. But yeah, maybe. This was like a pretty huge deal, and like it was very disrespectful to Ellen Page, who, you know, spent so long working on this game, doing motion capture and lending her voice to the game. And yeah, this is a pretty big moment where I think they kind of realized like where it was a step too far, right? And like how the likeness of someone like is still owned by the person whose likeness it is. You know what I mean?
And I think then maybe we can just kind of get back into some bigger picture stuff. I think one of the themes, which I mentioned up top, is that a lot of this is very male fantasy. A lot of these games are male gaze, juvenile.
I think it's usually from like the straight white male gaze, especially, which which means that we see a lot of like the same scenarios time and time again, or like we see the same actions, the same options. If there's any agency in the sex being depicted, we see the same conquest type, right? So even in who the characters are going after, it's a lot of busty blondes, right, that they're going after. So it's very much typecast. And, you know, if we're going to keep having sex in video games, can we at least have some variety? Just a little bit every once in a while.
For sure. Yeah. And we're finally seeing a lot more of that, I think, you know, with games like Dream Daddy, which is like a daddy dating simulator, which has been hugely popular. Again, kind of going in that same vein, game I'm actually quite looking forward to, Boyfriend Dungeon, is coming out soon. That's a game we played a little bit at PAX. And that's a game where you've got a bunch of hunky boyfriends that are they're essentially swords that then turn into boyfriends that you can date. And I think we're seeing a lot more of this. I think the medium is just growing up in general.
Right.
And then B, we're seeing gamers of all denominations and types, right? You know, we've got a lot more female gamers that there have ever been in the past, and a lot more queer gamers. Just if you just go on Reddit, there's a great subreddit called Gamers, GAYMERS, which is a really great community. And there are games being made for all kinds of people right now, which is why we're seeing a great uptick in all sorts of varieties.
Yes. And I think that's what I was trying to talk about when I mumbled earlier, which is that, like, I think we have, because a lot of game developers have been a white, male, straight, historically, we have the same types of games and they appeal to the same types of people. When this is one of my constant rants on this show, so I'll try to keep it brief this time. But like, we could have gameplay of all different types that appeals to different types of people, and not just shoot and kill type video games. Like, I think even if that's not true, that all video games are shoot and kill video games, that's the perception because of that situation. And I think, please interrupt me with any points, but I think that kind of leads into another thing, which I think is interesting, is that our society, and this is true of books, movies, whatever, is more okay with violence than sex. And, you know, it's okay that video games have people killing people, but then when there is a sex scene in Mass Effect, people get upset, and that makes news, right? And I think that's just a weird fact that that of our culture, and maybe that's shifting, like some of our discussion earlier said, but like that's just weird to me.
It's totally weird if you think about it from a perspective of even just like going to school and being in sex ed, right? Like it's very much girls have periods, don't touch anybody or you'll get pregnant. Boys have wet dreams, don't touch anyone or you'll get them pregnant, right? So like when we see it in video games, right? Like it's very much this, but in sex ed I was taught this. And we see it in anything that depicts sex, whether that's video games or pornography or books or movies, right? Like it's people freaking out. Whereas in other first world nations, like they have a grip, they have a lock on sex ed. And so they aren't as freaked out about it as we are.
Yeah, there's some weird American Puritanism or something that's going on with some of this.
Yeah, it is. It's only recently within, the past 3 or 4 years that I can comfortably like talk about pornography with my friends, because primarily it's like it's an individual experience. Talk about it with friends or partners or past partners, because it's like such
shame
in like American culture. It's all shame, and we consume this by ourselves. And bringing someone into this primarily individual activity, it's a little bit weird, especially with video games. Now you're not only consuming something that's like pornographic, but you're also experiencing it with other people or interacting with like sex in a video game with, multiple characters who have multiple different personalities, and different characters have agency and control.
And you can learn way more about this at the next Switch Headz meetup if you're interested. No, I'm just kidding. But this topic might be getting. I mean, this topic is already a little beyond video games, but it's like I think that because we have been so repressed with the way that we viewed sex in media, and particularly video games up to this point, I think that only leads to more of that. What was the word we were using earlier? Yeah, that the kind of juvenile like take that we have on all this kind of stuff. And it's like anytime you see sex in games, it's like because it's been so repressed, it almost like sets everything back a bit of a way. And it's like this self-fulfilling prophecy of this thing that you can't have, and so you really want it, but you can only show a little bit, and it just is such a negative way to view sexuality. And like you were saying, it's like you can blow someone's head off with a fucking shotgun or chainsaw them in half, and that's completely fine. And I think that normalizing that a little bit more, and the fact that I think here in America we're finally getting to the point where that's being normalized considerably more, can only help us grow as a society, and like we'll grow up, I think. And I think that like it's completely natural for kids. I mean, not like little kids, but it's like at a young age to like discover pornography or to discover sex in games or in movies or whatever. It's a part of the learning process, right? And it's like if we can normalize that stuff a little bit more and not have it be so closed off, I think that we would have a society of people that are a lot more accepting of all different kinds of people.
Agreed. Especially because like now kids can't stumble upon the weirdly pixelated Channel 5 or whatever channel it was. Like that's not a thing anymore. So like they're finding it in different ways, whether that's in video games or somewhere else.
Yeah. All the kids these days have an iPad. They know what Pornhub is.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, there's a lot that we can talk about here. There's a lot on our list. If there's anything anybody wants to specifically mention before we move on to sort of our experiences and that kind of thing, I'd love to hear it now.
I was just going to say, like, Patrick, you talked about like, and Kim, you mentioned this too, that game developers primarily made games for dudes, and means the dudes want to have, a similar gameplay loop, which is conquest. Let's go to that land and conquer the boss and defeat the boss. And these are very like male-centered decision making. And there's a research paper that we can link to in the Facebook group on Twitter. It's called "Sex Differences in Video Gameplay: A Communication-Based Explanation" by Kristen Lucas from the University of Nebraska. And she talks about some of the, like, breaking down those mechanics. So she says, quote, explaining that video games have been long designed to capitalize on masculine hunting abilities, mental rotation, route navigation, projectile guiding, interception, and then goes on to say that there should be games focused for women, for female identifying people, to focus on like landmark memory, object displacement, and perceptual speed, and designed from the ground up with these multiple audiences in mind and different perspectives.
And having more people, different people being developers is going to naturally lead to that somewhat too, right?
Yeah, for sure. That's where the indie revolution is like really helping this along, right? You're not so beholden to, shareholders and investors that are going to need something that's only going to sell to the most amount of people. You've got more niche audiences now, so we can get a more diverse kinds of voices in the developing of video games. I did want to touch, before we move on too much, I wanted to touch a little bit on just where Nintendo is at now with this kind of content. Like we were talking about earlier, Nintendo had always been very puritanical with their conservatism of their values and all that kind of stuff. And there was the kind of Nintendo seal of quality that, parents could trust that the kinds of games that their children would be playing would have a certain level of violence or sexuality or any sort of thing. That basically started changing in the 3DS era when The Binding of Isaac was ported to the 3DS. For a while, Nintendo had only allowed they didn't allow any like religious iconography or anything like that in their games, and that game is chock filled with Catholic imagery, images of tarot and Satanism, and then also poop and pee and stuff. Nice. Great game. It's one of my favorite games. But it's like, that was actually a pretty huge turning point, not just for the religious iconography, but for lots of different content. And we started seeing more and more content coming to these platforms. To this point now, the Switch, if you go on the eShop, like you'll find tons of like hentai and dating sim games, and visual novels and stuff like that never would have been on a Nintendo platform up to this point. Stuff that usually would only not even really be on Steam, you now can find on Nintendo's eShop, which is good. And I think Nintendo basically finally put enough faith in their parental controls system to allow the parents to make decisions for their children. And I think that's because, video games aren't for kids anymore, and they haven't been for kids for a long time. I mean, there are kids' games, but it's like the people who played games as kids are now adults, right? And are able to make these decisions for their progeny. And I think it's really nice to see. And it's just funny to me that like Nintendo now has one of the most open platforms for all different kinds of games on the market. I mean, even more so than Sony at this point. A lot of games that come to Sony's platforms are censored at this point, and they aren't on the Switch, which I find mind-boggling, but a really good step forward.
Maybe then we can, before we close out, we can kind of talk about some of our experiences, personal experiences, and then we reached out to the community and we can share a few of those too. Are there games growing up that were your first foray into sex and video games that made an impact on you that you want to mention?
Not so much sex and video games, but like, so this one wasn't so much the outright aspect of sex so much as it was like sexy girls on camera. And it was, I think it was Capcom versus SNK, and then also Darkstalkers. Those games were very flashy, like very typical, like big tittied anime girls, like hopping around the screen, like Felicia and that kind of thing. And that what's funny about that game is it was also like my first foray into fan art as a burgeoning artist, was like drawing Felicia. And like my mom found it and lost her marbles. She was like, absolutely not. Where did you find this? She was like, no, I know whose house you played this video game at, and you're not allowed over there anymore. So it was very much like she was down with the hammer kind of thing, but you still see it in a lot of the other games that I play, like even in the cutesy Atelier games, right? Like if you zoom in, like you'll see the booby bounce as they walk around, and I'm like, why is this still happening? So yeah, that was pretty much
boob
my first
physics are a
exposure.
very important part of Japanese games for sure.
Oh, for sure.
There's many that I can think about as being a very immature teenage. Downloading Tomb Raider mod, a nude mod for Tomb Raider PC Edition. But I think from like an experience standpoint, it's like The Sims. Like have my character like fall in love and therefore like have sex in this house that I created and designed. It's like a fantasy of a whole bunch of like building a life.
Yeah. And that was, I did that with The Sims as well. And there was like a mod you could type in that would allow you to like move the little blur bar from The Sims, like when they're showering or when they're having sex. And that was like, it's so rudimentary and they're not even doing anything. The models are just kind of floating on top of each other. But at the time it was like, hell yeah, that's what love is.
That's why we need more grown-up video games for sex.
For me, I think part of my sexual awakening as a youth was certainly being subscribed to video game magazines in the 2000s. I don't know if you guys remember, like ads in the 2000s, like early 2000s and like late 90s were just so tasteless. And like, I remember, I think it was not Fatal Fury. What was it? It was like, hold on, let me see if I can look it up real quick. But either way, there was a game where there were like two female lead characters that were in a lesbian relationship with each other in the game. And I just remember the ad for the game was like a big 2-page spread in Electronic Gaming Monthly. And it just said, these two ladies put the ass in assassin. And it was like so tasteless, but at the same time, I was like, that's making me feel something I've never felt in my life before. And I just remember like flipping through magazines to find the ads. And that was like definitely part of what made me realize like what sexuality truly was. And that's definitely gone down quite a bit. I think it's distasteful and pretty sexist. And so I think we've gotten a lot better with advertisement over the years. But back then I just remember like every ad that was sexually tinged in order to get the horny teen gamer on board.
I think that was going to be my point as well, David, and which is that like sexual imagery on covers to sell video games continues to some extent to be a thing, and it's very sexist. And I remember I was really into computer games when I was like about 12 when this game came out, Companions of Xanth, which is like a Piers Anthony, who was a fantasy writer, game based on his universe. And I remember my mom bought it for me and she gave it to me and she was like, I don't like this cover and I don't like the back of this game, but I got it for you anyway. Cause it had very sexualized female characters on it. And like, she didn't put the hammer down like your mom did, Kim, but she still bought it for me, but she made it known her feelings and I played it. So I don't know.
I was also going to say there's another crazy ad that when you talked about like sex ads, there's a Sega Saturn one, and it's a 2-page spread, and it's got a naked woman, and she's covered, but she's covered by Sega Saturn gameplay pictures. And it says, in case you didn't notice, there's a beautiful naked woman on this page. When you got Sega Saturn's triple 32-bit processing power, nothing else matters.
That's actually pretty clever.
Oh, I don't know.
It's got screenshots of like Virtual Cop and Panzer Dragoon.
Nothing gets me torqued up like Panzer Dragoon, baby. Also, the game I was talking about earlier was Fear Effect. If you guys haven't heard of that, it was like a PlayStation game, but that was definitely a large part of me growing up. I'll say that.
I think all of these stories and the ones we're about to share from the Facebook poll that you put out there, Matt, show that we do need better sex education and a more open society, because it's like kids trying to find things in video games, right? It's like, which is a lot of the things people said on our Facebook. Matt, you asked our Facebook group, and we heard a lot of the same games, which is The Sims. I think repeatedly, like I've tried to put them in the shower to see what would happen, and games like Tomb Raider and Dead or Alive, beach volleyball, and and various other games, that people listed. I don't know if there's anything anybody.
I mean, we gotta talk about BMX XXX.
Yeah, that one,
right? Like that was like one of the first like games that was overtly made for the modern, at the time, gaming consoles. That was overtly pornographic, and it was like cashing in at once on like the sex trend of like horny teen gamers, and also like the Tony Hawk Pro Skater style games. You know what I mean? But that game like actually had full nudity in it, and wouldn't. I mean, some GameStops had it, I believe, but like a lot of them wouldn't sell it. I think there was like an M version and an AO version of that game as well. So it's definitely worth talking about.
Also, I think there's a lot of them on here, but I did want to mention that somebody brought up just fandom and Fire Emblem fandom being what it is, and sort of the LGBTQ element there, that there's a large fan base that is queer for that game, but the games haven't always shown that, and so the fandom has kind of created its own element. And I think Kim talked about that with like fan art and all that kind of stuff being such a big thing.
We got to talk about the Sonic community too, right? Like, like the Sonic community's like very horny, and Googling anything to do with Sonic is always kind of a minefield that you have to walk through. But it's a blast to look through. And then I think in general, like the video game communities and like porn communities overlap quite a bit. Like I think whenever Breath of the Wild came out, I think the most searched topic on Pornhub was like Zelda or something like that. Or what was the there was a statistic, something about that, where it's like Zelda porn was like at an all-time high right after that game came out. Everybody just wanted to fuck Link. Link is hot in that game, I'm not gonna
lie. Well, I think we'll close out with some of our final thoughts then, or kind of maybe, in my opinion, like hopes for the future too of sex in video games. And I think like I'll just lead that I think I've sort of hinted at this, but I hope that to the extent that sex is in video games, obviously I'm not in favor of censorship, but I do, think like, hey, you have your porn games, whatever, that's fine. That's your thing. But if it's going to be in mainstream games, hopefully it's done in an adult, tasteful way that, it's representative of all people, and all the things we've been talking about, that it isn't just male gaze, and that maybe there should be some of that, if nothing's wrong with a little bit of anything, but just more adult, less juvenile sex representation in games.
Yeah, that like be about it. If you're going to be about it, then just be about it, right? Like be upfront about it. I think that part of the issue with like the hot coffee mod is that, GTA has always been about pushing the envelope, but then in that case, they kind of like quietly push the envelope. Like if you're going to be about it, just own up to it up front.
Yeah. And I think just more representation. There just needs to be more representation of all kinds of games, especially of different people with different sexualities or different orientations or different kinds of identifying factors, right? And I think that like having something for everyone, but not necessarily trying to encompass everything into one game, because that's impossible, right? And so it's like the more that we fragment into more like niche communities, the more we'll be seeing games made specifically for certain kinds of people. And I think that that's a great thing, and that can only get better over time.
Yeah, agreed. One thing I wanted to say before we go, I was watching some videos before preparing for this episode, talking. And there's a GDC from 2019 called Sexy Micro Talks. And they have a series of women talking about sex and video game. And it's really great. It's about an hour long. Once again, we'll link to it on our Twitter or social media. It talks about consent. And it's not only about respecting the player saying no, but you also want the player to say yes. And so like Kim, when you're talking about the like dating simulators, you're actively involved in, courting these characters. And in turn, like the game is designed to actively court you as the player. Mm-hmm. And like that tension and that consent is like, I want to see more of that in games where it's just not about conquest, where it's actively, engaging with me as a player.
Consent is super sexy.
It is. It is.
And Kim, do you have any sort of final thoughts that you might like to share with us on sex in video games and related talk?
I think that when it comes to like sex in video games, right? Like if it's what you're into, then it's just what you're into, man. Like that's okay. Like you don't have to be worried about it. Other people don't have to be worried about it. I'm a sucker for dating sims. Like I love a good dating sim game and just like get charged up over it, right? And so if that's your jam, then own that that's your jam. Have those conversations. If you want to be a sex game developer, go be a sex game developer. Get it out there. I think that really the way that it's been set up in the past is we can only go up from here, and I'm looking forward to see what that looks like over time.
Nintendo, please listen to us. Add dating and fucking into Animal Crossing. All right, thank you.
That's too far. I'm not into that. That's not what I'm here for.
Cool. Well, I think we talked about it. If you're out there listening, and like I've said before, we'd love to hear your thoughts on any of this. And we'll take a real quick break. And when we come back, we'll talk about all the video games that we have been playing over the last week or so. I have been playing the standard games I'm always playing, Animal Crossing and Smash Ultimate and so on and so forth. But I did want to mention a few other games I've been playing. I've played some Killer Queen Black with Austin, friend of the show, and that was a blast. And part of the reason I wanted to mention the Killer Queen Black session was we played a game where we were talking on Discord, just me and Austin, and we got teamed up with two people who were talking publicly on the Switch on the voice chat, and we could hear them and they couldn't hear us. And it was this really surreal experience where they'd be like, let's go economic. And then I'd be like, Austin, we have to make them think we can read their minds. Go economic. And we were just doing really great. And it was really great. They're like, these guys aren't so bad. And it was like, because we can hear you talking. And then
you should plug in your mic.
We should have
talk with some randos.
But we were already like all set up, and I was like, I don't know how to like. Anyway, it was just a funny experience. And then I picked back up Kunai because I had kind of set that down when Animal Crossing came out, and I'm really loving it. Again, the movement in that game is so great. It's a Metroidvania indie. You should check it out. And then I beat Cosmic Star Heroine, which is another reason I picked back up Kunai. So. Final thoughts for me on Cosmic Star Heroine. Really great 16-bit JRPG, but it has some problems, and especially late game in terms of difficulty. There are difficulty settings, but it gets a little too easy or too hard, and there's some optional bosses that felt too hard on hard settings, but too easy on lower settings. And so, and the story is just kind of meh, and the ending was not super striking, but I had a lot of fun with it, and it's not very expensive.
That's a ringing endorsement, Patrick.
Well, it's how I feel about it, and I just want to share that. But it was fun, and I obviously like beat it, and I put all, my Switch says I put 15 or more hours into it. So
nice.
So that was me.
I've been playing 3 games. Number 1, Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. It's so good. I was playing it, and I'm like maybe 40 hours in, and I was like in Machna Forest, and I was like, man, this game is so good. And my partner looked over, she's like, what? I was like, this game is so good. It's because the music is it's incredible. I love that. I love being in that world again.
Best Xenoblade game?
Yeah, it's my favorite Xenoblade game. Yeah. Second game, Command & Conquer Remastered came out. So I've been playing that. It's the same game playing on PC, and they just remastered all the graphics and sprites. One of the most surprise and delight moments that I had is the installation sequence is the same as it was from 1995.
That's adorable.
So it's got all of this 1990s UI elements with random shapes flying everywhere and voiceovers and full motion videos. It's great. And then finally, number 3, here we go. Blade and Sorcery came out with their new update, U8. It's a VR game. Not only do you get swords and stuff, but you have new spells. You can shoot fireballs. I'm telling you, shooting fireballs, pretty tight.
Oh yeah,
it's been a great week.
I've been playing literally nothing but Clubhouse Games 51 Worldwide Classics.
Can you list the games for us?
I could. I mean, I've got the game open right now. I could list them all. I'm not going to fucking do that. We've done that several times. But so I knew I would like Clubhouse Games, but I didn't know that I would become like helplessly addicted to it. This game is so fucking good. It's honestly, I think my favorite game of the year so far, which is kind of silly, but it's like, there's something about playing these games online that like really, really brings out the best aspects of this game. And I mean, it's Nintendo-fied, you know what I mean? Like there's no ranking system. There's no matchmaking. It just matches you up with a random partner. But that's also kind of the charm, right? Like, I've been playing a lot of Mancala. Mancala is like such a simple game, but also like there is an optimal way to play. And I know the optimal way to play just from playing it over and over and over again. And so like just slamming on people in Mancala online is like so fun. And then whenever somebody wins, you're like, oh shit, I got to go back in and like beat their ass. And it's like, and there's also like an unspoken like best 2 out of 3 rule that like everybody abides by whenever they're playing, which is a lot of fun. But yeah, Mancala is definitely the game I've put. Oh, did you have something, Patrick?
I'm so sorry. I forgot to mention that game too. I've been playing a lot of
Yeah,
that.
you've been playing too, right?
Yeah, and I just had to since I'm on a negative streak, be like, Nintendo had to Nintendo this game, and you're probably not running into this problem, David, but if you want to play 2-player local this game, you have to play with Joy-Cons. And
That's dumb.
Super
Yeah.
annoying because like my son and I are playing it a lot, and it's like I'm sitting here with this Joy-Con like just let me use a Pro Controller here.
Yeah, it's lame. You can play online with a Pro Controller. You can play all the games single player with a Pro Controller.
But as soon as you switch to 2-player.
It's the same developers that made Super Mario Party and a few other kind of party style games that also have strange single Joy-Con restrictions. So it's not surprising. It's dumb, but I play mostly by myself. I'm playing mostly in handheld mode online. And I mean, even like a lot of the times I'm not even using controllers. I'm using the touchscreen. Like for instance, Speed is a really fun game to play with touch controls, and it's way faster because you can kind of like hold a card over an area while you're waiting for someone else to put a card there. But yeah, some of my favorite games on here so far have been Mancala. I've been having so much fun with that. I also learned backgammon for the first time, and I'm really enjoying that. And then my recent obsession has been Hanafuda, which is the Japanese card game that Nintendo used to manufacture back in the 1800s. They made Hanafuda cards. And I've always wanted to know how to play this game, and I've finally learned, and it's so much fun. And there's a lot of strategy to it, and then also a good amount of luck. So it's like, it keeps you on your toes and it keeps things interesting, but there are also like kind of optimal ways to play the game. So yeah, I really recommend this game. I mean, it's $40, like, you know, $40 for 51 games, like obviously sounds like a really good deal, but it's like, I can see myself playing this game for a very long time. It's like a very good, like pick up and play, like 5 minutes of something real quick. And then you look at the clock and it's been like 3 to 4 hours and you're still playing and it's 4 a.m. That's been my experience with the game so far.
I'll echo that because I did give my one major criticism, but we are having a lot of fun over here with it too.
David, I love that you talk about Clubhouse Games 51 Worldwide Classics the same way that I talk about Xenoblade.
Yeah. No, I think it's incredible. Like I'm seriously in love with it. And I've only played about half the games too. Like there's still a bunch more games for me to play. And shout out to Dan, who was on last week's episode. We spent a good like 2 hours playing this game, just kind of jumping from game to game. So much fun to play with a friend as well. So I really recommend the game. For $40, you can't really go wrong. What about you, Kim? What games have you been playing recently?
Yeah, so I mean, definitely a lot of Animal Crossing, kind of sneaking in some time here and there when I can, doing a little bit of taboo time traveling because I'm a delinquent. I'm also really enjoying like the wedding photography series, and so I'm trying to like zip through the month of June so that I can get it done and be done with it and like never look at it again, but I do enjoy it. Also replaying Breath of the Wild here and there. So like anytime the cuteness of Animal Crossing is just too much, I'll just kind of hop into Breath of the Wild. I'm trying to conquer this weird fear that I have of fighting Lionels. Like, I'm not a good dodger. I'm not good with Flurry Rush. I get hit over and over again. And so every time I see a Lionel, like, y'all, I just wimp out. Like, I just, no, done, out. Like, I zip out of there, or I turn the game off. So I'm working on that right now, and trying to get good with it, trying to get over that fear. And then also a lot of Dragon Quest XI.
Nice.
Which, God, it's so pretty. It's such a pretty game. Just everything about it is good. But I know that all of these will be derailed in July when the new Story of Seasons reboot drops, and I'm just going to lose sight of everything else for like a good 2 weeks.
Well, good to know yourself and be prepared.
Are you a Rune Factory fan?
Absolutely. And know that I have Rune Factory 5 Special Edition. It is on my Switch. I have played it to completion. I'm done.
Nice. Yeah, I've been hearing lots of great things about that series recently, so it's good to hear your endorsement of it as well.
Awesome. Well, then that does it for the episode. Thank you so much, Kim Williams, for being on the show. Thanks for coming on and talking to us.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Thanks to Corduroy for doing our music. Sorry, Chris McKeever, we did not play Disney Tsum Tsum Festival.
Not quite.
If you want to find me, Patrick, online, I am PDYX most places.
You can find me on Twitter, Matthew, MATHYOU.
I'm pretty much everywhere on the internet at Monolith Fiji. And what about you, Kim? Where can people find you?
So I'm on Instagram as KIMIPW, but my account is private, so you have to ask to follow me.
There you go.
So make sure you have a really nice avatar, elsewise you're getting banned.
Get in the poop.
Like we said, thank you so much, Kim, for being on the podcast. That was a blast. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're looking to find our podcast on social media, we are at Super Switch Headz on Facebook and Instagram. We are at Switch Headz on Twitter. Make sure you join our Discord and our Facebook group. It's kind of our forums. It's a great place to share content with fellow Nintendo gamers and other gamers of other kinds of ilk as well. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I hope you had a great time. We've got a whole slew of great topics coming up for you for the rest of the month. I'm very, very excited for the rest of June and into July as well. So keep listening to Super Switch Headz. We love you guys very much. Stay safe out there. Keep fighting the good fight, everybody. Remember to wash your hands. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.